Welcome, 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 Zoom call. How is it going? We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. Once you're coming in, make sure your notes are ready to go. Get your note pages ready. I'm going to start in about 2 minutes. Got a lot of cool, good topics to cover today. Should be very, very fun. Good times, good times. All right, guys, hopefully y'all are doing well. Like I said, we're about to get started. It is 2:25, so for the sake of everybody's time, I'm going to put 2 minutes on the clock so that way you can get down the key terms and the objective. It is a very short objective, but there are a lot of key terms and there is no do now question today. We're going to get right into content. So let's go ahead and get started. 2 minutes on the clock. About a minute, 20 seconds left before we get started.
I hate Amazon.
About a minute and 20 seconds. Hopefully we get more people in the call. We're missing a few. I know it's Friday, guys. This is the last class. 45 seconds. We're going to get started very soon. Thirty seconds.
Wait, your class is on already?
All right. So here we go. It is 2:27. We're going to go ahead and begin. So, welcome. Today we are talking about the failures of compromise. So there was attempts at compromise. There were some compromises. Now we're going to talk about the failures and what will eventually lead to the Civil War, right? Our objective, explain the political causes of the Civil War. That is what we are doing. That is what we are talking about. Make sure you have your key terms. Make sure you're ready to go. So let's go ahead and get started. Failures of compromise. Objective, very short. You don't need to write this. This is already something we've covered, right? Franklin Pierce. He's the president during this time. He's the president right after Polk. Just reminding you who's the president and where we're at. So under Pierce, there were expansions and changes in Manifest Destiny. One of the more notable things was called the Gadsden Purchase in 1852. This is the last major chunk of the continental United States that was made. If you look at this map, it's the little orange spot on the bottom. This is the Gadsden Purchase. It's in southwest it's in the southwest of the United States and it's northwestern Mexico. You're gonna need Gadsden Purchase, and you're gonna need the part about having to buy Cuba. So I'm gonna get there. So you need Gadsden Purchase, you need what it was. Southwest land bought to build a railroad. Southwestern Territory purchased to build a railroad. That is the purpose of the Gadsden Purchase. They were trying to complete a railroad, and rather than go through the mountains or around mountains, they bought that little piece of land so they could go straight through. Flat piece of land. So the Gadsden Purchase was all about building a railroad. The Austin Manifesto, you just need the name and the date, and all you need to know is it's a failed attempt at purchasing Cuba. That's all you really need to know about it. It rallied anti-expansionism and free soil northerners. So basically, all you need to know, again, can't stress enough, is that it's a failed attempt to buy Cuba. Austin Manifesto, 1854, failed attempt to buy Cuba. And the Japan visit. So the expedition was sent off by Fillmore, and Matthew Perry actually visited and contacted Japan, like you heard about in your class last year, and like we mentioned a few days ago, in 53, 54, while Pierce was president. So I'll leave this slide up for about a minute and a half. All right, you need to get Gadsden Purchase, the whole thing, and you need to get what the Austin Manifesto was and when, which was, again, an attempt to purchase Cuba from Spain that failed. So again, minute and a half. You don't even really need to worry about the Japan visit.
Who attempted to purchase Cuba?
It was the government. The government attempted to do it. So it wasn't so much like a person. It was Pierce's plan, the president's plan, but it never went through. It was like an offer that was made. Good question, though. The question was who attempted to purchase. The answer is the U.S. Yeah. From Spain. About 30 more seconds. Actually, no, sorry, 30 seconds. Make sure you have those things down. We're going to move on. We're going to talk about some more Manifest Destiny things that happened under Pierce before we move on into our first key points. All right. All right, let's move on. So I put the manifesto again, attempted by Cuba. If you didn't write it before, write it now. If you already wrote it, I'm going to tell you a really quick story about a guy named William Walker, who he's up here from the Gadsden Purchase, led expeditions into northern Mexico, specifically in Baja California and Nicaragua. He did not successfully capture Baja California, but he does capture Nicaragua. So there's a southern slave-owning American adventurer named William Walker, who captures successfully the little province of Nicaragua in Central America and institutes his own government. And he's there for 2 years. And during those 2 years, for a short time, while Franklin Pierce is president, he will recognize the Walker government as its own government. Now, a coalition of Central American nations will send militias after him, and they will capture and kill Walker and dismantle his government. But there was an American Southerner, I can't stress this enough, who invaded and adventured, right? His expedition, Mexico and Central America. He took over Nicaragua, and he held it for some time before being overthrown and executed by, I believe it was, Venezuela, maybe. I think they were Venezuelan. I don't remember where they were from, but they did eventually eliminate him. And he was gone. Just a weird, interesting story I wanted to mention. You don't really need this info. You don't need to write it. You can mention William Walker captured Nicaragua. The more interesting thing here is that Pierce, the president, actually recognized the government. He acknowledged. No, he didn't. He tried to attack it and he failed. So he didn't capture Baja California. He tried and failed, but he did capture Nicaragua. And while he was in charge of there for a short period of time, the president recognized it as a nation. So we're going to move on very shortly. So I'll leave this up for another 30 seconds or so. This is a quick one, and we're going to get into the first key point after this. I feel like I'm kind of cut off there. First key point is coming up right after these messages from our sponsors. Just kidding. We don't have any sponsors. That'd be funny though, right? This lesson is brought to you by Audible. Subscribe now. All right, let's move forward. Again, you just needed that last little piece, not much there. Key point one, don't write this word per word. Basically, the party system as the political parties of the time ended when issues of slavery and nativism weakened those parties. So the two major parties kind of split up, and the emergence of sectional parties started to become more prominent. So smaller parties that would have been small pre the 1850s that weren't a big deal became a big deal because the other parties split up. And the most notable party of there was the Republican Party in the North. A lot of Northern, they're not quite radicals yet, but they will be, who are Northerners that are against slavery, start to form up. So you need that second half, right? The political parties are weakened, and when they're weakened, new political parties form, and the most notable one was the Republican Party in the North. Political parties are weakened, the old ones. You can even say old political parties are weakened. While they're weakened, new political parties form. The most notable one is the Republican Party. The reason they're weakened, issues of slavery and nativism, splitting everybody up, right? They're splitting. So I'll leave this up for another 90 seconds, about a minute and a half, and then we will get started on the next thing. A minute left. Make sure you got this down. If you need more time, let me know. Otherwise, we're going to move on. You guys are doing well on this Friday, last Friday. Good way to look at it. It's not the last Friday. I don't know why I said that, but last class of the day. Last class of the Friday. "30 seconds. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on. We're going to move on to the next part. Key point 2. Hey, look at that. There was nothing for that key point. All you need to know is that info. The courts and national leaders made a variety of attempts to resolve the issue of slavery in the territories that were mainly Kansas and Nebraska. This included something called the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Dred Scott decision, which we're going to talk about on Monday. But these ultimately failed to reduce conflict. So we won't talk about Dred Scott today. We will talk about it on Monday, but we are going to talk about the Kansas-Nebraska Act and Bleeding Kansas. We're getting right up to the Civil War today, so we should be able to cover all of that. If for whatever reason we run out of time, we'll cover Lincoln Monday, but we should be able to do that as well. So another minute and a half. This is a shorter key point, so a minute and a half should be good. Courts and national leaders tried to resolve the issue of slavery in territories that had not yet become states. This included the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Dred Scott decision. But they failed, ultimately, and it will lead to conflict. Does anybody remember the name of the guy that prevented conflict from happening pre-1850? Like why there was never violence when new states came in?
Named, he was the savior or something.
Yeah, the Great Compromiser was his nickname. Remember his name?
Hold on, I got
Yeah, he's in your notes. If you have a notebook with you, check your notes. Look back a few weeks. His nickname is the Great Compromiser, but what was his name? Because you got to know his name. He was a senator. He was from a border state.
Henry Clay.
Clay. Henry Clay. Good job, guys. So Henry Clay is the Great Compromiser, but he's dead. He died in 1851. And the Kansas-Nebraska Act is going to happen in 1854. And what's going to happen, and it's funny how that worked out, right? He's the Great Compromiser. He's been compromising since 1820. But when he dies, it's almost like the ability to compromise and meet in the middle without violence died with him. And we're not going to get that anymore. Like from 51 forward, I'm sorry, you're just going to see this stuff get worse and worse and worse. And we're going to talk about some of the worst of it today. So let's move on. That was the timer. So first thing, Kansas-Nebraska Act. Stephen Douglas and Chicago. What do you need about that? Well, Stephen Douglas of Chicago is the main, of Illinois, I should say, not Chicago, is the main reason this act exists. The parameters of the act, it divides Nebraska and the Nebraska territory, into the state of Nebraska and the state of Kansas. They got to vote on whether or not they would be a free state or a slave state. So the people living in the state got to vote on it. That's what popular sovereignty is. Popular sovereignty is voting. Why is Douglas doing this? Because he wants to put a railroad right through the middle of it. So Douglas will win his railroad and Southern support. This repeals the Missouri Compromise, and it ended the Whig Party and the second party system. So the reason it does that is because it makes everybody mad and splits everybody up. If you remember from 1820, the Missouri Compromise made this line, this red line that's on this map, you couldn't have slaves above the line. Well, this act, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, gets rid of that. It makes it to where now they can vote and choose to have slaves if they want to or not. So this is going to make everybody angry. It makes Southerners are a fan. I shouldn't say that. Southerners are okay with it. But it makes the entire North angry. It'll kill the Whigs. It'll kill the other parties. And it'll leave this huge gap. So it's the Kansas-Nebraska Act's fault. But it also opens the door for violence. And the reason it does that is because now you have states getting to decide on whether or not they are free states or slave states, getting to decide if slavery spreads to the North or doesn't. And it's all based on voting. What are people going to do? What do you think they're going to do? Type it in the chat or come up and say it. What do you think people are going to do if it's big, important decisions just based on voting? All they have to do is vote. It's not 2020 where all the elections are secure. What are they going to do? What do you think they'll try to do, I should say? What are people going to try to do?
What?
So the decision on whether or not these new states are going to be free or slave is going to be voting. But it's not 2020, it's 1804. It's 1854, I'm sorry. So there's no records or anything. You just show up and you vote. I live here, I vote. Somebody said riot, that's a good thing. What are they going to try to do? If the decision comes down to a vote, what are they probably going to try to do? Rig the voting, cheat, right? They're going to try to do something, vote twice, maybe. They're going to try to get in there if they're not from there. Same difference, kind of, yeah. Rig the voting is good, cheating. They're going to figure out a way to get around it, or at least they're going to try to. And somebody said Trump was right. No, it's not the same thing. There were no, there's no way to prove where you're from. It's a territory. The whole thing. It's 1854. But so that's what people are going to try to do. And somebody earlier, I think it was Chip, said rioting. You're going to see worse than that. And we're going to get into it on the next slide. So I'll give you another minute to fill in the parameters and impacts of this act. And then we're going to get into an era called Bleeding Kansas. Anybody want to guess why it's called Bleeding Kansas? Why do they call it Bleeding Kansas?
Because blood was shed in Kansas.
Pretty much. Yep. Blood was shed in Kansas. Murder. Some murder, some death. Broadswords are involved. So are guns. Yeah, it's going to get intense. So again, another quick minute. Good stuff. Like what I'm hearing so far. Like what I'm seeing. Death.
So wait, what do you mean by the impact?
Like the result. The impact of it.
What?
of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So another, again, about 45 seconds. If you need more time, let me know, because then we're going to move on. We're going to get into Bleeding Kansas.
Man, I wish Florida rights wasn't a thing.
I know.
We're not gonna have our fill list.
All right, we're going to move on. So, Bleeding Kansas. Before you write, let me tell you about this. So, Kansas settlers, you had Free Soilers and Jayhawks. Free Soilers are that political group from yesterday that we talked about. They're not really against slavery as an idea, they're against the spread of slavery. Then you have a group called Jayhawks, and those were anti-slavery groups. They were against the expansion of slavery overall, both groups. So what those two groups did is they worked together and they started moving into Kansas, because Kansas is still just a territory. There's no proof or records that you live there, so all you got to do is show up there and start living there. So people started doing that are on the pro or the anti-slavery side. And then you had another group called Border Ruffians. These were people that were most likely from Missouri, but they were pro-slavery and they were like militias. They too started moving into Kansas. So you've got anti-slavery groups living in Kansas, and then you've got pro-slavery militias living in Kansas. Those two things mix together well if they're living really close together. No, they don't. And so you're going to get violence erupting. Now, you need the top part. You need to know the names and the groups of the people living in Kansas. The violence in Kansas, you can summarize it. But basically, you got the Wakasura War, which is a skirmish between pro and anti-slavery militias. So basically like a little battle. There was a little battle over this. Then you had something called the sacking of Lawrence, which was a town that was attacked and ravaged and pillaged by pro-slavery groups. And then you have the Potawatomi massacre that I can't pronounce. This was a massacre of pro-slavery people, citizens, families, by a guy named John Brown, who's portrayed in this painting. John Brown, him, his sons, a couple of his supporters dragged these people out of their homes, killed them with broadswords because they were pro-slavery people. So what you get in Kansas is violence, a massive wave of violence. So to summarize this, right, you need the beginning, you need the first part. You need to know the term Jayhawks, Free Soilers, Border Ruffians. Then the violence, I just want you to sum up. These groups meet, they don't match, and there's violence. Try to get one, if you're going to name one specific violent incident, name this one, the Potawatomi massacre, and make sure it's John Brown slaughtering a bunch of pro-slavery people with swords. That's what he did. Kind of made him famous in those circles. So go ahead and write that in. I'll give you about 2 minutes because Bleeding Kansas is a big topic. This is one of your key terms. You kind of got to generalize what is Bleeding Kansas, why is it bleeding, what's going on. This was all during 54 to 61, by the way. Basically, this violence will continue up into the Civil War. By the way, guys, I just realized I have the wrong date on the Potawatomi massacre. It is the 23rd through the 4th. The 24th is fine, but it's 1856, not 61. That's my mistake. So it's 1856. I have to double check because it looked wrong, because I believe John Brown was already dead in 61. No, the Bleeding Kansas stays the same, but the last massacre was in 56, not 61. John Brown was still anti-slavery. Yes, John Brown is very anti-slavery then. John Brown is super against slavery. He hates slavery. I have a quote from him in a second that we'll see. John Brown dislikes slavery so much he's going to start the Civil War like a year and a half too early. And it's going to kill him. but we'll get into that in a second. Again, change that date. The massacre on the bottom is 1856, not 61. 56, not 61. That is my mistake. I don't even know how that got in there. The date on top stays the same. 54 to 61 is when the violence in Kansas. The violence in Kansas, guys, look at it this way, basically doesn't end until the Civil War starts. You're gonna 50, yeah, 61, change it to 56. Which conflict do you write? Write the last one. That's the one that you need to name, that you should be able to recognize the name. All you need to know overall is that there's violence going on, right? The violence is constant. It's off and on throughout the entire setup, essentially. So you need to know that there's violence going on, but the thing you need to know and write is that last one. And again, change the date. I apologize. I don't know why there's a wrong date on there. Somebody probably messed with my slides. Maybe it was Eric. I don't know.
Huh?
You messing with my slides, Eric?
What? How did that
I'm just kidding, Eric. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. All right, so let's move on. That was a timer. If anybody needs time, let me know. Otherwise, we're gonna move on. Don't write any of this. Don't write it. Don't do it. All you need to know is that there was a bunch of controversy leading into Kansas becoming a state. It was very difficult. There was the Topeka Constitution, which was an anti-slavery constitution that was rejected by the Senate. Then there was a pro-slavery constitution that was rejected by the House. Then there was another constitution that was anti-slavery that didn't go anywhere. And then there was another anti-slavery constitution that was accepted by Congress after the southern states left. So basically what you need to know is that to be Kansas's state, let me phrase this differently. The process that Kansas took to become a state was long and challenging. It was a challenging process that constantly changed. First, they wanted to be anti, then they wanted to be pro, then anti, then pro. It was back and forth. And they didn't become a state until after the southern states seceded from the Union. They did not become a state until after the southern states left. So Kansas struggled to become a state and only became a state after the southern states left the Union because of the issue of slavery. None of these things could make it through. None of these constitutions they made that were pro or anti until the very end. It was all constant fighting. It was a big bloody mess. Again, about 45 seconds. You don't write the words on here. It's a little too much. Again, all you really need, I want you to write that trend down, right? Kansas's process was back and forth between pro and anti, and eventually they became anti-slavery after the southern states left. That's when they were allowed to be a state. So you don't need to write this down. I'm only going to give you another quick 30 seconds to kind of get that idea. And then I'll have these like lists kind of more streamlined later in your review. Don't worry too much about the names and the specifics. All right, let's move forward. So this, you are going to need a name and write down. It's the Brooks Summer Incident. You need the date, May 22nd, 1856. Senator Charles Sumner, I put Summer on the top book, and Representative Preston Brooks were debating the issue of slavery and violence in Kansas. And basically, you need the name of the event and the date that it happened, the name of the two representatives. They literally got into a fight. And I believe it was Sumner beat up Brooks. No, I'm sorry, it's the other way around. I think Brooks beat up Sumner over this issue. There was literally a fight in Congress. So what do you need to know? Brooks-Sumner incident, May 22nd, 1856, a fight broke out in Congress over the issue of Kansas and over the issue of slavery. You could put Kansas, but I want you in parentheses, right? Slavery. It's really, they're fighting about slavery. That's what they're arguing about. You don't need to worry about the quote. In fact, don't even bother writing the quote, right? You need that, what this was. This was a fist fight in Congress. One of them beat the other one, not to death, but beat him senseless with a cane. Back in my day, Congress used to get into fist fights on the floors. That's what used to happen. You don't see Cinderella. Politicians do the cane. Yeah, he's the second guy to beat somebody up with a cane, right? What I will say is that one of the better portrayals of Congress during this time period is in the Lincoln movie, the one where Tommy Lee Jones plays Thaddeus Stevens. If you ever watched that movie or if you've ever seen that movie, their portrayal of Congress is really good. The way they yell at each other and are really like intense.
Oh, that Lincoln movie?
Yeah.
I saw that.
Their Congress portrayal is really good. Again, for the Congress of the 1850s, not the Congress now. Who beat up who? I believe it was Sumner beat up Brooks. Everyone lives again, I guess. All right, so again, you don't really need to write much on the slide other than the name of the event and the date, and then what happened, right? A congressman and a senator got into a fight over slavery. So we're going to go to move forward. James Buchanan, you need the name, you need his party, he's a Democrat, and you need the dates. 57 to 61 is when he served. You need to know what he supported. He involved himself in the Dred Scott decision, which we'll get to tomorrow or Monday. He liked the pro-slavery constitution in Kansas. That's what this was. And he supported the Kansas-Nebraska Act, meaning basically, big fan of slavery, James Buchanan. In a nutshell, kind of big fan, kind of was okay with keeping it going, kind of wanted it to spread, big fan of it. Democrats in the 1850s, what can we say? So I'll leave this up for about a minute. Just know James Buchanan's president. He's the president right before Lincoln. You're making good time on him. About 30 seconds. If you need more time, let me know, but we're going to move on. Again, name, date.
Wait, sure.
Yes.
Kansas and Nebraska split up.
Yes. So it was the Nebraska territory, and then they split it into Kansas and Nebraska.
This guy is the 14th or 15th president.
15. th President James Buchanan. All right, let's move forward. So John Brown and Harper's Ferry, do not write the quote down. I'm going to describe the Harper's Ferry raid, and all you need to know is John Brown and the Harper's Ferry raid and what it was. So basically, John Brown, very, 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 very anti-slavery. He's about as anti-slavery as he gets, but he's a militant, which means he's willing to fight for this. And in fact, he wants to fight for it. He was an instigator during the Bleeding Kansas incident, right? He murdered a bunch of people with a sword. I'm going to read you this quote now. I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. I had, as I now think, vainly flattered myself that without very much bloodshed, it might be done. So obviously, what crime is he talking about? What crime is this guilty land? What did they commit? What did they do? What are they guilty of? Slavery, right? The crime is slavery. And so he's so anti-slavery, and he thinks that the only way to get rid of slavery is with violence. Is he right?
Yes.
Yeah, right? Nuke my chat box. Is he right? Chat, what do you think? Is he right? Nuke it. That means everybody, even if you already see the answer. Yes, he was right. John Brown's one of those figures that's a little sympathetic to a lot of us because in a way, don't get me wrong, he's violent. He broke the law. He tried to take over the country. He committed treason. But he's ahead of his time in the sense that he's an extreme abolitionist and he wants slavery gone, and he knows the only way to do it is through violence. And that's true. The only way that slavery was eventually gotten rid of was through a violent, bloody war. He's ahead of everybody in that sense. So in 1859, he gathers his sons, a couple of loyal supporters, and he attempts to raid a armory in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, a military armory where they keep all the guns, all the ammo, all the powder, all that stuff. And almost instantly, it goes very wrong. John Brown, very good at violence and riots and stuff, not so good at military things. And so he goes, it becomes a mess. The garrison and some of the people living there trap him in the armory. He locks himself in. Eventually, a young major by the name of Robert E. Lee will lead a group of Continental Marines to surround and capture John Brown and his supporters. A couple of his sons will die in the fighting, so will most of his supporters. And John Brown will be taken away. He's wounded, he's taken away, and eventually he's hung for treason. His plan was initially get the guns, then go to plantations and start freeing the slaves, and they'll help us. The problem is he gets cornered in the armory, and when he says, hey, help us, nobody comes to help him. So his raid doesn't get anywhere. It's a raid. It's one attack. He's cornered, captured, and then he's killed. But it was it's 1859. Does anybody remember the date of the Civil War when it starts? Anybody remember it? If you remember it, type in the chat or just shout it out really quick. I've said it a few times, but I haven't formally given it to you yet, so I'm just curious. And if you don't know it, just put no clue.
1980.
Too late. No clue. 1861. Civil War starts in 1861. So it's right before the Civil War. It's like a year and change, and then the Civil War is going to start. So what you write for this slide, John Brown, raid on Harper's Ferry, 1859, right? And all you really need to write is it's an attempted slave rebellion, revolt that fails. And in the end, John Brown is killed. It's an attempted slave rebellion that fails. Not rebellion, sorry, use revolt, because it's not slaves doing it, it's John Brown doing it. Led by abolitionist John Brown. That's his goal, that's his plan, that's the game plan. Get the slaves to rebel with me. And it does not work out for him. He's captured, he's killed. But there's a song that I forget how it goes, but I think it's called John Brown's War, John Brown Goes to War, and it's like a little jingle. And literally, Union soldiers are singing it a year and a half later after he's executed to go fight in the Civil War. It's an interesting little tidbit. There's whole books about whether or not like you would consider John Brown a good guy or not because of what he did. But why he did it, you could argue. And again, it's kind of funny. Robert E. Lee is the guy that takes him down, leader of the Confederate Army. So I'll give you 30, 40 seconds. Again, what do you need to write? The name of the raid, Harper's Ferry Raid, 1859. John Brown, white abolitionist, leads what will be an attempted slave revolt that fails. And it fails really bad. No slaves actually even show up to help him. Most of them don't know what's going on. The ones that do are like, how am I going to help you? I don't even have a gun or anything. It doesn't get anywhere. It's not the best planned. Not to mention it's in Virginia, which is like the middle of slave country. All right, so let's move on. Last key point of the day. Abraham Lincoln's victory on the Free Soil Republican platform in the presidential election of 1860 was accomplished without any Southern electoral votes. After a series of contested debates about secession, most slave states voted to secede from the Union, precipitating the Civil War.
So this is what causes the Civil War.
Yes. What causes the Civil War is Lincoln, a known and outspoken, well, not outspoken, but a known abolitionist, is elected president. All of the Southern electoral votes didn't matter. A lot of Southern states didn't even have him on the ticket. You couldn't vote for him in a lot of Southern states. So he didn't win any Southern votes, but it didn't matter. He still won the election. And because of that, Southern states are angry. They feel like their voices aren't being heard. They feel like they're being ignored. They feel like their rights are getting taken away. And they threaten to secede and do secede from the Union. And the second they do that, Lincoln says, nuh-uh. And he immediately instigates a civil war. Because, not instigates, I shouldn't say he instigates it, but this immediately precipitates a civil war. He didn't own slaves. It's not that, as far as I know, he didn't own slaves. It's not that Lincoln owned slaves, but he was an abolitionist. He just wasn't, how should I put this? He was an abolitionist, but he wasn't somebody who was, he doesn't start this war for slaves. He doesn't. He starts this war to preserve the Union. And in the process of fighting the war, to his credit, he will make it about slaves. He will free slaves. He will show the rest of the world, this is what the South is actually fighting for, right? Because the South is fighting for slavery. That's why they're doing it. They're fighting to preserve their slaves. Lincoln's fighting to preserve the Union. Eventually, when he makes the war about slaves, that's what Frederick Douglass was arguing with him about. When we talked yesterday about Frederick Douglass, and he, like, they would meet, Frederick Douglass is like, you got to free the slaves. And Lincoln doesn't want to. It's not because he doesn't like slaves. It's not because he's a supporter of slavery. It's just because he knows if he does that, then he threatens, and we're going to talk about this next week when we get into the war, the border states, that some of them are slave states. He potentially makes them want to switch sides. And early on in the Civil War, Lincoln's losing that war. He only starts winning it when it takes a lot. I don't want to get into the war. We're talking about his election. But he starts the war because they left the Union. That's why he starts it. He himself, as far as I know, was not a slave owner, but he was an abolitionist. And that is like 99% of the reason why those Southern states leave, is because an abolitionist was elected president and they are not happy. That's why they left. They don't leave because of states' rights. That happened in 1832 and they stayed. They leave because it's about slavery. A state's right to own slaves is why they're angry. That's what happens. Who's that? Oh. Hi. All right. So let's go ahead and I'm going to give you another minute on here and then we'll move on. One minute.
Sir,
Yo.
we need to be out of here by 3:15.
All right. So election of 1860. I just want to show it to you. Don't write it down. Lincoln wins. He wins by a lot because he wins basically all the northern states. It's kind of a landslide victory. The only states that don't vote for Lincoln are the southern states and a couple of the border states. So let's move on. The first southern state secedes in 1860, and it is South Carolina. And it's right after Lincoln's elected, pretty much. Mississippi will follow shortly after. So will Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, and the Arizona Territory. They all leave basically over the issue of slavery. Again, you don't need to write this. This will be up later. The only thing you need to write, I'm sorry, South Carolina secedes from the Union in 1860, first state to do it. Blame South Carolina. That's the only thing we do need to do, is blame South Carolina. All right. So again, we'll talk more about this when we get into the conflict, but there's kind of like 3 Souths going on. Kind of this weird issue. Let's see if this works. Ah, there it is. So there are the balance of free and slave states in the Union. Watch as they change throughout. And then right up into the Civil War is where you see it ending at, through 1860. Can I go back to where? If it's the states, you need the states? This one? All right. So I'll leave it on there, and I'm going to get ready. We're going to start doing our exit ticket. So make sure that you have your exit ticket ready. Open up Google Classroom. And I'm going to go through it, and then I'll let you guys loose to do that. Just posted the assignment. You don't need to copy it, but somebody was and wanted to, so they got it. You don't need to. So, exit ticket, really straightforward, easy peasy. Make sure you get it done today. It's due today. So, exit ticket's really straightforward, really easy. One document. It's called A House Divided. It's a speech from Lincoln while he was running for president. Read it. Hippo. That's all you got to do. Then there's 3 questions. Answer 3 questions. Identify the argument. Identify a piece of evidence from the source that supports his argument. Then identify another piece of evidence outside the source that supports his argument. You have about 15 minutes to do this. It shouldn't take you any more than like 8. So go ahead and get started. If you have questions, let me know. I will be here on Teams. Just message me. I will be sitting here actively at my Teams until 3:25. But if there are no more questions, you guys are good to go and head on out of the call. Have a great weekend, guys. I will see you all next time. See you, Z. Have a good one.
After the game, go play that new Call of Duty.
See you, Sabrina. Have a good one. Like I said, guys, exit ticket. Make sure you get that done. That's an important one. It's a big one. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end the call so that way I can get the video uploaded. But make sure you get this. If you need me, again, just message me on Teams. I got my Teams open, ready to go.